Hello and welcome. My name is Gabriel Ronquillo. I am the programs manager for the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. Here are a couple of things that I'd like to discuss before we move on to our briefing. We ask that you share your point of view along with the speaker's point of views. So please go ahead and follow us on X, Instagram, and LinkedIn at the CHLI. After the panel discussion, we will have time for Q&A. There is an option below for the Q&A, so please go ahead and insert any questions that you have, and at the end of our discussion, we will have those questions be asked. This discussion, along with the Q&A, will be uploaded and sent to our YouTube channel at the CHLI, so please go ahead and join us at our YouTube channel after this discussion. And now to kick things off, I'd like to pass it on to our President and CEO, Marianne Gomez Horta.
All right, so thank you, Gabriel. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to our CHLI Congressional Public Policy Hill Briefing Series. The Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute is the premier organization founded by members of Congress to advance the Hispanic community's economic progress with a focus on social responsibility and global competitiveness. Our vision statement is advancing the Hispanic community's diversity of thought. Founded in 2003, CHLI is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're the only bicameral, bipartisan, Hispanic-led and Hispanic-serving nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We're dedicated to fostering a broad awareness of the diversity of thought, heritage, interests, and views of Americans of Hispanic and Portuguese heritage. I would like to recognize our board member, Congressman Bill Flores, for moderating today's conversation. He brings a wealth of knowledge, and I will share that in just a little bit as well. A special thank you as well to our sponsors. These are our year-long sponsors who support our quarterly briefings, both in person and the virtual ones as the one that we're doing today. I want to thank Accenture, Amazon, AstraZeneca, Capital One, Chevron, Dominion Energy, Eli Lilly, Halion, Hispanic Access Foundation, and Prometric. So thank you all for the sponsorship. I also want to thank the CHLI team. None of this and the great work of this year couldn't happen without the team. A special thank you and shout outs to Gabriel, Angela, Nicole, Tia, Emily, Bruce, Andres, Sofia, Elizabeth, Paola, and Maya. Thank you all for the support this year. Moving on, the CHLI Congressional Public Policy Hill Briefing Series provides a platform for an in-depth dialogue on current public policy issues that affect the U.S. Hispanic and Portuguese communities. These are briefings to educate and inform members of Congress, their staff, and the Hispanic communities across the country. Today, we'll be discussing energy policy. Before we begin today's discussion, we would like to share a message from our CHLI Vice Chairman, Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart. He serves the Florida's 26th Congressional District. The Congressman is a senior member of the House Committee on Appropriations. He is the chairman of the State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Subcommittee. In addition to serving the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and Defense subcommittees, he passionately serves his constituents, tirelessly in defense of individual rights and liberties, promoting economic prosperity, and supporting a robust national defense. The Congressman is very well known for his advocacy on human rights and democracy around the world, as well as for his support of our global allies. So now, Gabriel, if you can please share the message from the Congressman.
Trucks to bring products to market, whether it's fertilizer, everything depends on energy. And we can produce it here by American hands cleanly. It'll help create jobs. It'll help our economy. It'll lower costs. It will help our national security. And you know something? It will also even help our environment. We have a very busy agenda, an ambitious agenda, but if we work together, as I know we will get it done for the benefit of this great country, for the benefit of our families, for the benefit of our future.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, Gabriel, for the video here. Now I would like to formally introduce everyone to our moderator, the Honorable Bill Flores. He is an entrepreneur, business leader, and public policy leader. In 2021, he transitioned from public service to re-engage in the private sector through board membership and to spend more time with family and community activities that he's involved in Texas and across the country. During his service as the representative for the 17th Congressional District of Texas from 2011 through 2021, Bill served on the following committees: House Energy and Commerce, House Budget, House Natural Resources, and the House Veterans Affairs. Congressman, the floor is yours, dear.
Thank you, Mary Ann, and thank you for those who chose to attend this program. It's a pleasure to be here today as we discuss energy policy. As the incoming administration prepares to implement its new energy policy, businesses of all sizes, from small enterprises to large corporations, must begin strategically planning for years ahead. As we heard in Mario's introduction, he talks about the importance of energy throughout every aspect of the economy. And so we have a great panel with us today. I'm going to introduce them. We are missing one at this point in time, but we're expecting Kwame to join us soon. And then we can have him introduce himself. So let's begin with Debbie. Debbie, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we'll go to Germaine. Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Flores. Great to see you again. Chevron is really proud to be a sponsor of the Congressional Hispanic Institute, and I'm very proud to be a member of the board and help foster young leaders in the community and hopefully eventually get them working at Chevron. So Chevron is an integrated large oil company. We are in a number of countries around the world, but we are an American company based in Texas. We believe in cleaner, affordable, and ever cleaner, affordable, reliable energy. And so we spend a lot of time working on that front. I've been with Chevron for 16 years as a lobbyist for the company. Before that, I worked on Capitol Hill for a number of members of Congress. I worked for the governor of Michigan, and I started my career in the state legislature of Michigan. So I've seen government working and not working on a number of different levels. And how I see my role is to find a way to help policymakers implement the best policy possible that will help enable our future. And Chevron, we think, is a really key part of that future.
Thank you, Debbie. We look forward to the discussion as we go through the rest of this program. Germaine, would you introduce yourself and tell us about what you are doing and what you're passionate about?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mary Ann. My name is Germán Chulmira. I'm the founder of Oren Energy Holdings. We are an investment company with a special focus on energy, mainly renewables, some thermal. We also invest in quantum computing, and we have a special interest in certain sectors that are related to national security. As Congressman Diaz-Balart mentioned, we are convinced that energy is not only a catalyst of change, but also it's crucial and strategic for the development and dominance and the much needed presence of the United States beyond our borders, especially in Latin America, when there are other nations have been developing a very strong and growing influence in it. We believe that energy and energy diplomacy, it's one of the critical instruments to do that. As mentioned, I am personally passionate about everything that has to do with the geopolitical role of the United States abroad, with a special emphasis in Latin America.
Great, thank you. I look forward to continuing an in-depth discussion today with our panel. I'm going to ask each panelist a specific question, and then based on their expertise, and then following that question, or following that answer, I'll ask each of the other panelists if they have any additional points of view that they'd like to contribute. So Debbie, let's start with you. You're an experienced public policy advocate. You've seen a lot of change in Washington over the years. Now we appear to have another large change underway here in D.C., not just in the administration, but also in Congress. So how do you approach that from the seat that you, from your position today?
Well, it's really important for Chevron to be seen as the partner of choice, and that means that we try to work with everyone. I think it's really important in this environment to remember that there is more that unites us than divides us. And if we approach things and get to know the people who are our partners in government, we can actually impact change, but do it in a way that's really productive. We have to recognize that not everybody is going to agree with everything that we say, but we probably have some commonalities that we can come together on. I'll give you a quick example of that. Permitting reform. I think in some people's heads that it's all about just oil and gas permitting reform, but really permitting reform in the United States is needed for manufacturing. It's needed for wind, solar. It's needed for our industry as well. And so if we can look at that commonality and say, look, we all have some trouble with permitting. It's not efficient. And we've got to figure out a way to make that work. It doesn't mean throw away all the regulations. It means let's see if we can make this a more efficient system and get it working better for everybody. And that includes our friends who are doing wind, solar, building cars, whatever that is. And if we can work with a team of people, and there are bipartisan people on the Hill that are doing that, Congressman Peters and Congressman Westerman come from different parties, but they have a great relationship and they are working together to try to find solutions here. So the more that we can focus on that and help foster those relationships, and then with all of the new people coming in, no matter what party it is, get to know them as people and figure out what it is that they and their district really care about. And are there things that we have in common? It may not be the most obvious thing. It may be some, trade relationship or something that they want, or a country they're passionate about, but we do have things in common, and it's upon us to figure out what those things are and see if we can find things that we can work on together, recognizing that we won't always agree, and that's totally okay. But we do have a responsibility to represent the interests that we have, to represent the people that they've been elected by, and to find solutions. And I think there are a lot more people in DC who want to do that than people recognize.
That'd be great comments. Germaine, would you like to offer any of your perspectives on that question?
Well, it was perfectly put by Debbie. I would like to add only the manufacturing conversation, I believe, is going to be very important and also a very sensitive one in terms of what is to be manufactured in the US and what is not. Ideally, we want to maximize the manufacturing capacity locally, especially for strategic assets. And at the same time, we want to be aligned with our neighbors. Some countries which have a long-standing relationship, industrial relationship with the US. So I think that part of that conversation will have to be addressed at the time coming. Regional integration in terms of not only energy, but manufacturing capacity.
Thank you, Germaine. I'd like to expand on some of the comments that you made, that each of you made, and that is that, from my perspective as a former policymaker, the most durable solutions that have the longest term benefit for the American people are those that are bipartisan. And it seemed to me like Congress, particularly the last 4 years, was focused, and every question would start with where they would disagree instead of where they would agree. And if we could get our policymakers to start with the question, where do we agree, and work forward on solutions like that, and then agree to work on areas where they disagree later on, I think would have a better outcome for the American people. So let's hope that happens. We've got an update. Our third panelist, Swami Kanti, is going to be joining us in about 7 or 8 minutes. I think he's gotten hung up in a schedule upset, and he should be online with us pretty quickly. So, Germaine, we're going to start with you for the next question. President Trump during the campaign President-elect Trump talked a lot on the campaign about restoring America's energy dominance. What do you think that means?
Well, thank you very much. It's a very interesting question and a very broad answer. I'll try to summarize as much as possible. But I think that has to do with not only maximizing output, creating energy independence, and at the same time helping the US to become an energy exporter and to implement policy through that. But also I believe that in order to do that, everything is connected, like what David mentioned. Manufacturing is connected, job creation, policy making, exports, and at the same time, to eliminate the dependence or the reliance on foreign hydrocarbons or other forms of energy, I think is critical. However, one thing that I want to emphasize on that is that I strongly believe that, as we all heard before, that energy security is deeply connected to national security. And I do believe that part of the solution to that is the development of a cellular network of generation and storage facilities all across the country in order to not only develop the energy dominance, but to be energy reliant and completely independent. That will strengthen the role of the United States in the international arena even further.
I'm glad you introduced that connection between energy security and national security. I think too often in the energy discussion that gets lost, and it's unfortunate because I think we've got a great near-term example, a recent example of that connection, and that is to look at what happened in Europe following Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Because if, to the extent that countries don't have energy security, they don't have national security. I'm glad you brought that up. Debbie, any comments you could add on that? What do you think President Trump means when he talks about American energy dominance?
Can you hear me now? Sorry. I think that he is looking at domestic energy supply and developing more of it, and that is a wonderful thing. I will disagree a little bit with my colleague here about energy independence. I think it really is more about energy security and not independence. There are different types of crude all over the world, and there are reasons that crude is developed in the places that it is, because that's where it's available, but all crude is not created equal. So for example, the crude that we bring into our California refineries is generally from Saudi Arabia, because that's light sweet crude. We do not have the pipeline infrastructure to bring our light sweet crude from Texas to Canada, unfortunately. I'm hoping that maybe his policy will help support developing those pipelines across the United States to do that. But right now, we take that crude and send it elsewhere, but we bring heavy crude into our Gulf Coast refineries. So it is not as simple as just saying, let's stop using other energy. It's really about having a cohesive program, making sure that the United States is the biggest provider, and we have every availability to do that, especially in LNG, but also making sure that we're partnering with countries and having a good relationship so that we are working together on energy and using that as a security tool. I think that we actually can help with trade deficits by producing more energy here and sending it out, especially in the LNG front. And I think that will be a focus. It's not necessarily the trading relationship that people worry about with tariffs, but it is an important part of the trade mix. And so I'm hoping that policy will grow and develop. Certainly, he has said the right things about LNG. The current administration has had a pause on exports. I understand that they've had some concerns about exports. We disagreed with their idea to pause that while they were studying it. We think that you can do two things at the same time. So we are hoping that the president will lift that when he comes into office and allow us to export again. We have a lot of partners that are very eager for our energy, especially in Europe, so that they don't have to get it from Russia or China. And so I think it's important for us to position the United States to do that. But I hope that people will look at the entire global market, and then also do that for renewables as well, because things like solar panels, we need to be able to get those from places other than China. And it doesn't mean cut them off. In our view, we don't have to cut them off completely, but we do need to make sure that we have a diversity of supply so that we can keep all of these technologies moving and not have one really have a stranglehold on the supply that we have in that space. So I think we need to look broadly at the whole energy industry and make sure that we're looking at it as a diverse supply and bringing all the things that we need.
So we're having a great discussion so far, and I appreciate, Debbie, you bringing up the comment about the LNG pause, as it's called. When you think about it from an environmental, that was done more to pacify the environmental community. But when you think about it and look at the science behind it, having LNG used as a fuel source in Germany is much more environmentally friendly than them burning lignite like they're burning today. So I wish that when people decide to try to start drawing lines in the sand from a policy perspective, that think, about the full picture of things from an environmental perspective, from a fiscal perspective, and from a security perspective. So I think both of you have raised some great points. Debbie, let's stick with you for a minute. What are some of Chevron's priorities in the upcoming Congress?
Well, a little bit off of the specific energy discussion, there is something we've all been talking about. We're calling it Tax-mageddon. There is a huge tax bill out there that's important to every industry, not just the energy industry. And it's important that we get tax policy right. And the biggest reason for that is we want to make sure that enough money is available to reinvest into the United States. So when we look at a field, it can take us billions of dollars to get that field going before we ever get oil out of it. And the more we can have a good tax policy that supports that, the more money we can invest in the United States. That's true of other industries as well. We need to get this right. We need to get personal tax policy right because it impacts everything we do in the economy. And, while we look very much at the energy sector, we are an important part of the entire economy of the United States. So, we're working closely with a lot of other industries, the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, to support a good, strong tax policy that makes sense for the United States. And I also think paired with that is going to have to be some spending reform in a number of areas. So that's one of the things that we're working on. We agree that global policy on energy is really important, and our global relationships are very important. So that's a priority for us. And we are looking at policies like the LNG pause, permitting reform, as I mentioned, I think is incredibly important to help the economy grow, especially if we want to produce more of anything here. People are talking about steel and wanting to produce more domestic steel. That's a wonderful idea, but we need to create an environment to make that happen. Permitting reform is going to be part of that. The tax policy is going to be part of that. And then if tariffs are put on incoming steel, that could impact sometimes negatively the economy. We understand the reasons for wanting to do that, but finding that balance in the policy is going to be a challenge. So we're watching that issue very closely, and we just never really run out of things to work on. And then always happy to pursue other things that people bring to us and say, hey, this is a passion of mine. Is this something that your company can get behind? So we want to be someone that a company that people feel like they can come and talk to us and see if there are other policies that we can work on.
So thank you, Debbie. And as a person who was in Congress when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, and being able to observe firsthand the economic boost that came from that, and particularly the great impact it had on working class Americans, I'm hopeful that Congress can wrap its arms around that and get it extended early on in the new Congress. Talking about priorities, let's stick with that for a minute. Germaine, what do you think will be the top priorities of the incoming Energy Council that's chaired by Interior Secretary nominee Doug Burgum, who's going to lead it along with Energy Secretary nominee Chris? What do you think the priorities are going to be for the Energy?
Hi. Yeah, sorry, I was muted. I was saying thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to answer that question. Before we get into that, I like to reinforce what Debbie said, because I don't believe there's a disagreement. It's just different. When we look at things, especially when it comes to investment in infrastructures that we made, it's a very long-term look. And I 100% agree with you, Debbie. In the short term, what you mentioned is exactly what has to be done and how should be decided on. But one of the things that we strongly believe is that hopefully there should be an energy policy that will survive any change of administrations in order to be able to be in a position to plan and to make the necessary investments, especially in infrastructure, in terms which are way longer than 4 or even 8 years. And we're looking at a future where, with an extremely diversified matrix, not only crude, of course, crude is the main player on this matrix, but we look at renewables, we look at nuclear, we're paying a lot of attention to amazing, fantastic developments that are happening in some of our portfolio companies with nuclear fusion. And we're thinking of 2035, even as early as 2035, where we're going to be seeing something completely different. I know it might sound a little, dreamy in a way, but we're less than, actually a little over than 10 years away from it. So 2035 is not so far away. Bill, going back to your question about the Energy Council. Both Burgum and Wright have expressed strong support for fossil fuels. I mean, we all know that, okay? But I also believe that it's going to be a diversified council, not only focus on that. I think that, as David mentioned, renewable energy will have a spot on the table with a more realistic dimensioning. New technology, as I mentioned, nuclear should be also included. But there's one thing that I want to emphasize, and it goes back to the national security conversation. I believe that DoD should be part of the conversation and should be part of the council, because to create not only policy, but to execute and to create all the necessary, DoD has to be, when it comes to energy, both domestic and foreign, it has to be part of the conversation. I think that also the council is going to be focused on reducing the regulatory constraints. That's very important in order to speed things up. Like we like to say, Silicon Valley moves at a different speed than the public sector. So the constraints are one of the things that are impacting the speed of how development can happen. Then linked to that, I think the council is going to be also focusing promoting the energy infrastructure development. We need infrastructure. The list is long. And I think that the opportunities for the private sector to invest, not only from the public sector to invest in public-private partnerships and different forms of associations, are there. But in order to do that, the reform will be necessary. Again, energy independence, I think the council is going to be focused on advocating for energy independence, especially with the US becoming a global energy producer and exporter. As I said, reducing the reliance on foreign energy, and with that, leveraging the geopolitical influence. And I think that one point that is going to happen naturally is that the renewable energy policies are going to be reevaluated in a way. That's my take.
Thank you, Germain. And Kwame, welcome to our briefing. I'm glad you could join us. We've had a good discussion so far. I'd ask you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little about Edison Electric Institute, or EEI, as we commonly call it in the power industry. And then I'll give you a couple of questions so we can catch up.
Awesome. And for the record, Congressman, thank you so much for this. And thank you to the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute for the opportunity and the patience. I've been on, for the record, since 11:52. In the audience. I've heard everything, but I wasn't able to be seen, and so forgive the technical difficulties of Zoom. But EEI has been around since 1933. We're a very old trade association. We have 62 members domestically, about 65 members internationally. We like to say we are the first 5% of the GDP, because without power, there is nothing. And so we take our role as a critical industry very seriously. And we're looking forward to working with the incoming administration on numerous policy discussions that will affect our customers and our ability to serve. So a little about me. It's going to be a little bit about me. Been at EEI for over 9 years now. I'm managing director in the state practice. But pardon the pun, I'm vertically integrated within the association, in that I do local, state, and federal advocacy. And so it gives me a good organic touch point with several policymakers who may start off as mayors but end up as senators. And so very robust conversations throughout my tenure here, and looking forward to many, many more.
That's a diverse experience, or a diverse group of policymakers that you have to work with. So
Indeed.
So while we're talking about policymakers, I'm going to stick with you for a minute. How does the incoming administration's energy policy affect EEI member companies? And what role do your members, the EEI members, play in shaping that policy discussion?
Well, our members are playing a robust role with trying to educate and inform the incoming administration about where our members see the energy future. We agree with the administration's position on trying to be energy dominant. How we get there is another conversation. Obviously, the outgoing administration had critical landmark pieces of legislation around the CHIPS and Science Act, the infrastructure bill, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. I know my colleague Debbie touched on the tax credits provisions within IRA. Those are going to be critically important to our members and helping to shape policy. I know the incoming administration has some concerns around some of the clean energy provisions and renewable portions of that bill. And so we're going to be working to show the economic development opportunities that the bill has, in addition to some of the loan programs that were in the infrastructure bill that our members care about. And so we're going to be hitting the hill hard and working with members in conjunction with staff to lay out a roadmap of how to move forward.
Thank you, Kwame. Germaine, Kwame introduced the subject of the Inflation Reduction Act. What do you think is going to happen with that? Do you, we've got new Congress, we've got an incoming administration. There were a lot of things that were said about the Inflation Reduction Act during the campaigns of all the folks that were on the ballots this last November. What do you think is going to happen to you? Do you think it'll be repealed? Do you think you'll have minor modifications, major modifications? Or is Congress so divided, so evenly divided, that you just may have changes made to it through limitation amendments in the appropriations process? What do you think will happen, Germaine?
Look, it's such a broad and covers so many things that I would like to make a differentiation between the big issues and the smaller issues. So I think that the big issues are going to take time. They're going to be discussed in committees, and there's going to be. I cannot really foresee what is exactly the outcome going to be, because I think it's going to be something hybrid between what was stated and what's actually going to come out of there. But I do believe that we're going to see in the very short term very visible changes in what I like to call the small issues, the things that we can visibly see or talk about, and they are not critical for this. I do believe that there's going to be a better use of certain resources that are covered under IRA. And I want to emphasize on something that Debbie mentioned earlier, which is permitting, and also permitting. I mean, from the private sector, if you're asking me from an investment perspective, what is the thing or what's the biggest thing that we look at when we're looking at an opportunity, is that, because that's the bottleneck. That can kill a project. So I think the resources, some of the IRA, not only resources, but the focus is going to be redirected to that direction.
Germaine, Debbie, what are your thoughts about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act?
I think it's unfortunate that people want to look at everything as an all or nothing kind of thing. There are clearly some great provisions in that legislation, and there are clearly some ones that aren't working great or that weren't as good of ideas. And so what I'm hoping is that the people in the middle who haven't been the ones yelling about either thing will say, look, these are ones that are working. Here is a plant that was actually started in my district because we're able to produce X thing now. And, kind of bring those stories to light and say, look, there are some good ideas here. And we have agreed that there are a lot of those tax credits that make a lot of sense. I think there is an assumption that maybe that oil companies don't support things in the renewable space. That is not true. We actually do a lot of work in that space ourselves. We're really interested in the carbon capture and storage, some of the hydrogen work. There's a lot of things that we're doing and that we're investing in. I think people would be surprised to know we actually have a solar field in New Mexico that powers our operation, because having enough power to produce is really important. And the grid is something that we don't want to tap into the grid if we don't have to. We used to use natural gas in order to do our production, and now we're using solar panels to make that happen. That might, give an environmentalist a heart attack, but at the same time, we look at it and go, people are looking to us to reduce our carbon footprint, and this was a way to do it. So we're not opposed to any of those things, but getting the policy written right is important. And we should never feel like we can't reevaluate a policy once we've started it. I think there's this mistake that happens in Washington that things become sacred. You can't touch them. But we have to look at this as a really dynamic world and a dynamic place to invest. And we need to look at all our policies every once in a while and say, okay, are they working? Are they doing what we want? And if not, let's tweak them. And so I think bringing some rational thought to the table and getting people talking about it is a really good idea. And I don't think that in the long run they will trash the entire bill, because there are some elements that are incredibly good and helpful. And I think that you'll see people, coming together and showing some of those stories and saying, this is something that's happening. And, we believe we need all of the energy that we have. The energy demand continues to grow. You just think of how many devices are in your eyesight right now that need power. It's a lot. We need the power that EEI is providing. So I don't see us ignoring one part of the energy sector for another. I think it's all going to have to come together, and we're all going to have to find a way to evaluate these tax credits and other policies and say, okay, here's where we can tweak something and make it work better. That's what I hope anyway.
Thanks, Debbie. Well, the subject of the grid is starting to come into the conversation. One of the great comments that Kwame made that I never really thought about, but he is spot on, is that the electric industry is the first 5% of GDP, because without the grid, we don't have an economy. And so, Kwame, I'm glad you brought that up. So I'm going to give you the next question. What regulatory changes should utilities expect? And how can organizations like EEI proactively engage with policymakers to ensure that these changes support reliability? And I'm kind of asking this question from a selfish perspective. Is some of the audience may know, I'm on the board of ERCOT, which is the grid manager in Texas, the third largest grid in the country, and we care a lot about reliability. So, Kwame, what can you add to the conversation about the regulatory changes to expect?
Well, I would hop on what German spoke around siting and permitting. I think that's going to be a very big issue in next Congress. And in addition to what happens at FERC, we don't know what's going to happen with the chairman, whether or not he continues to stay on as a commissioner, and subsequently who will be the new chair, and how they view transmission and some of the interstate sort of fights that may come up. Also, I'm sure NARUC and some of the other local commissions are going to have a lot to say around permitting reform and what happens in that space. And so I would look to see a more robust action in that space from this administration once the total committee has been sort of made up. And obviously, what happens with the chair is going to be critical to that conversation.
Good point. Good point. I mean, the appointments are a huge part of an incoming administration's activities, particularly on commissions that most hardworking Americans don't think about, and FERC is one of those. One of the other ones I think about is NRC, what's going to happen there as well, and Nuclear Regulatory Commission. By the way, for the audience, we're going to have a period at beginning at about 1 o'clock for your questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and queue those up in the questions box below, and we'll give those to the audience once we get toward the end of this panel. Debbie, any comments on what Kwame said about the grid, or Germain? Debbie, I don't think it's part of your portfolio, but I'm just curious if you have any comments to add to what Kwame said.
Well, we do actually think about the grid a lot, because in some areas we are reliant on the grid. Like I said, we produce a lot of our own power, which helps the grid. But depending on where we're going to do new energies, we may need power in areas that we don't currently have access to the grid to do that, and we may need help with that. So we think it's a really important debate, and it's something that, again, permitting reform is a big part of getting the grid where we need it to be. And then I just worry about just grid security. It's really important for us to make sure that those fundamental things that we need for our economy are secure, so that all businesses can continue to operate. And so, again, in the national security argument, we need to talk about how to keep the grid safer. We saw with the Colonial Pipeline attack that there was a real concern about how that came about, and it caused a panic for people who thought they wouldn't be able to get gasoline. Now, fortunately, it wasn't their operational system that was separate than the system that was hacked, but it did have to be shut down to make sure it was safe. And all of the companies came together to try to get the resource where it needed to go so that people had gasoline. But I think that we really need to think about cybersecurity and how important it is in the mix, and making sure that the grid is secure, because all of us need that for our businesses and for our homes to continue to operate.
If I may, before you interject, Congressman, I just want to piggyback on what Debbie said. We're going to have a new chairman of Homeland in the Senate, Rand Paul, who's very much opposed to CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which plays a critical role for our industry in particular. And so it's going to be curious to see, what, if any, agencies get, truncated, eliminated, kept. Obviously, there's going to be this Doge caucus and an outside entity looking at ways to sort of trim government, but also just keeping in point, the math is the math. I think the majority will have maybe a 2 or 3 threshold or margin in the House and a 3-seat margin in the Senate. Very little room for error. And so how the leadership is able to harangue the various caucuses to push through the president's agenda will be fun to watch, to say the least.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that sometimes Congress is fun to watch these days. So we wish they'd just quietly do their job, and we wouldn't have to worry about a 2-vote margin if we could get our policymakers to start with where they agreed and try to come up with bipartisan solutions. But that may be a little dreamy on my part. Kwame, let's stick with you. Recently, if you feel comfortable with this question, several companies in the IT space have announced tie-ups and investments with nuclear-related entities and operations to meet their insatiable need for electrons, particularly for data centers, cryptocurrency, and so forth. What's this telling us about the future of the grid?
Well, for me, it's telling us that low growth is a real issue. Artificial intelligence is sort of driving this particular space. To be very frank with you, our members, don't have consensus on how to meet the demand, other than we know that we have to build out more capacity. And how we do that, given some of our members are vertically integrated and have generation. A lot of our members are not and just have poles and wires. And so how do you marry the two? We are, as a trade, obviously, we have to be Switzerland and try to work with all sides. And so we don't have consensus yet amongst the industry on how to move forward in that space. But we do know at the baseline, we have to build out more capacity to meet the demand. And how we do that going forward, we're going to need, obviously, more partners and stakeholders to be involved in that space.
Thanks. Germaine, do you have anything to add in terms of the tie-ups recently between the IT industry and the nuclear industry?
Yes, and thank you for asking. And I think that this question is actually connected to the previous one. I mean, the grid has been, in a way, overlooked for a lot of time, and our energy has been focused on growth and new technologies. And now that we are facing the problem of, okay, we need a stronger, smarter, modernized grid, it's on the conversation. I like to think that we as consumers or users with the grid, we're like in a toxic marriage, but with no divorce at sight. But in all seriousness, I think that the grid security, cybersecurity, it's deeply connected to the IT sector. As I mentioned, some of our portfolio companies, one of them in particular, who's very well advanced in the quantum computing and AI space, has developed, and we are working with some utilities in terms of cybersecurity, because it's not an idea, it's a reality that's been going on for years by now, especially in California. But I want to reinforce that the need to develop a cellular infrastructure with generation, storage, transmission all over our territory. It's critical in terms of achieving that security, both from a cyber and also from an operational point of view. However, going back to your question, public-private partnerships. We believe that not only the public sector should or can do it alone, not only the private sector should or can do it alone. We are strong believers that the synergies in the P3s, as we call them, that's where the solution is. Not everything can be attacked at the same time. Not everything is a fantastic investment opportunity, but some systems are critical and they have to be addressed not only from a policy perspective, but hands-on, because especially, well, actually yesterday, Meta called for an RFP for all sorts of nuclear vendors and providers yesterday. So, and this is tricky because it's important, but once those systems are online, the grid's going to suffer and the grid has to be prepared. So we have, I believe that when I talk about P3s, there has to be a constant combined efforts to create not only the necessary infrastructures to facilitate the necessary investments, sometimes from the private sectors to create that capacity, but also to be able to do it in unison, because we had experiences in emerging markets where there were fantastic generation programs, but there was no grid. And building the grid would take 10 times the amount of time that would take us to build the asset. So back to the US, I think that it's important. I think that it will get attention not only from an energy perspective, but also from a national security and a strategic perspective. And that's why it gets tricky from our point of view, because I don't want to use the word regulation, but something will have to be managed in a future where we have a multiplicity of private generators with nuclear facilities who are, let's say, not coming from the energy space, and some sort of management will have to happen with that. It shouldn't be a very loose regulation, although I don't like to use that word.
Those are great comments. We've seen an incredible amount of change in terms of the relationships that are building between the demand for electrons in the IT community, and also the only source of dispatchable zero emissions energy, which is nuclear. So it's interesting to see that tie up. So let's stay on this subject for a minute. I'm going to toss this out for all three of you, and then those of you that are interested in jumping in can answer. But as I said, it's nuclear is the only source of dispatchable long duration emissions-free electricity. But since the commissioning of the Vogtle 3 and 4 plants in Georgia, the U.S. is not investing much in this important energy resource. So should that be part of the American energy dominance initiative that the incoming Trump administration is talking about? And if so, what can Congress and the administration do to help facilitate that? So who would like to start there? Kwame, I noticed that you're not muted. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think Congress should look at more R&D development in that space, especially around small modular nuclear reactors, because of how capital intensive it is to build a new reactor in this country. Obviously Georgia put in a lot of time and investment into that space, and I don't know if other states are going to be willing to sort of follow that lead versus waiting for some type of tea leaves from Washington before they move forward, because of just the capital intensive nature that it is to take on that type of project. But I do think appropriations committees and the like, and authorizing committees should look at, what it would take to sort of fund the next generation of reactors at SMRs.
Thank you. Debbie, do you want to pitch in on that one as well?
Sure. We're very supportive of bringing more nuclear energy online, but I think what you need to think about here is there's a concert of policies that have to happen. The reason that nuclear became kind of on the outs was everybody was worried about nuclear waste and managing it. I happen to have worked for the first nuclear physicist in Congress, and what he always said to me was, look, if you can store it and monitor it it's not a problem. We should be doing research. There's things we don't know about nuclear waste that maybe we'll learn and find solutions from that. But just throwing it out because this one problem existed didn't make sense to him. And I think that that's really an accurate depiction. We get so hung up on a problem that we see that we forget about the benefits that are there. And the emissions aren't a problem from nuclear. It's the waste. Well, we can deal with that. In France, they were doing reprocessing, and we don't do reprocessing in the United States that I know of. And so we need to look at that. It's a really good idea. And then, you can make your resource go further. So it's all about trying to get people to some practical solutions and to look at the big picture and look at all of the different policies that can enable that. The investment, the amount of money that it costs to do it is a huge hurdle. And it's been impressive to watch the projects in Georgia go. It's really very cool to see people take that risk, but not many companies are able to do that on their own. They really need the help. So it'll be interesting to see where this grows. And then as these smaller reactors are coming online, or nuclear fusion, which we actually have some investments in as well, there is, a lot of possibility there, but there are going to be a lot of questions as they come online as well, as my colleague pointed out. So, I think it's an exciting time for every part of the energy sector, because we do need so much energy. And, with AI and all of these things, we have the demand. It's just, how are we going to figure out the policies and the investments to make those things happen?
Oh, thank you, Debbie. I want to remind the audience that we'll have the floor open for questions from the audience in just a few minutes. So if you have a question, be sure and drop it into the Q&A box, and we'll give those to the panelists as we get a little bit later down the road in the program. Germaine, do you have any thoughts on this? What is nuclear part of the energy dominance initiative that the incoming Trump administration and Congress are talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a strong believer in that, but also, as we mentioned, fusion is something that's on our mind and our portfolio. I don't believe that there's one single solution for all. There's going to be a combination of different technologies, different policies, investments. But what I do see, or I envision, is that I believe that what's going to happen in the energy space in the next year, we're going to be seeing is something similar that happened to the aerospace low orbiting satellites industry. We're going to see a lot of very well-funded private entities becoming key players in the sector, moving faster than the traditional players, innovating. And if I may take 1 minute, I want to tell a small anecdote that I had the privilege to witness with once there was a NASA person who was invited to a launch at SpaceX, one of the early ones. They were just testing different sorts of rockets, and he was there, and the rocket launched, and it reached a certain altitude, and then it basically exploded, and everybody was cheering except the guy at NASA. So he's like, what's going on? Why are you cheering? Because the test was just to get to that point. It was not to not to fail, not to explode, not to lose the hardware. So at that point, I realized the difference in the mentality of how certain technology teams work. It's speed, it's funds, and it's try and error, and we adjust. But that multiplied 1,000 times at the speed of light. While in the traditional structures, it may take 5-10 years to, let's say, finish a development that would be suitable to be, in this case, launched. So I think that kind of phenomenon, we're going to start seeing it in the energy sector, especially in the electricity sector. And that's why I was mentioning my biggest concern is permitting, because that's going to be a hurdle.
Well, thanks, Germaine. We are going to get into the public questions here in a few minutes, but I want to give Debbie a last question, because Germaine, you've talked about what your priorities are. Kwame, you've talked about the priorities for EEI. Debbie, what do you wish more people understood about Chevron and the oil and gas industry as a whole?
Well, thanks for that question. There's actually 3 things that I would like people to walk away with. The first is that, we are very proud of the work that we do in oil and gas, and we aren't walking away from that. We think it's great. And, we've been at this for 145 years. And we look at our history and see how we have been able to even progress and how far we have come. And, using oil and gas has allowed us to do more advanced things than a lot of other countries are able to do. So we're very proud of that. That doesn't mean that we've stopped looking at new things and new ways to do things. We're a very high-tech industry. I think when they think of oil and gas, they get this narrative of it's dirty. But this is one of the cleanest eras that we have been in, where we have done things more efficiently, where we found ways to do it better, where we're looking at new technologies, we're reducing our carbon footprint voluntarily, I might add, because it's the right thing to do. And so we'll continue to do that. And then as a high-tech industry, we are looking for new innovative things. And so we have a whole investment group within the company that is looking at other things that we can do and invest in, like nuclear fusion, or I'll give you an example of my favorite one. We saw this startup that has an idea to take carbon from the atmosphere and turn it into road gravel. Well, having worked in transportation in my prior part of my career, you need a lot of road gravel in the United States to build our roads and to keep them structurally sound. That would be amazing if it works, but they were at a point where they needed an infusion of cash to go to the next level. So if that happens, that's a big payoff for us as well, because then we're going to be a part of this new technology that can capture carbon and do something different. And we have a lot of those things that we're doing with various startups, and we see ourselves as a partner of choice because we want to help innovate. And where we can use new technologies and new ideas, we're going to do that because we see ourselves as a part of the future economy. Whether or not people decide that they like the idea of oil and gas, we are going to be there doing that in our traditional business, but we also have a new energies group that's looking at new ways to do things, whether it's biofuels, changing our carbon footprint, coming up with new ideas for how to do things. We're really interested in hydrogen and developing more hydrogen, especially for really intense applications like steel production and that kind of thing. So there is a lot of opportunity out there, and we don't see ourselves as an old business that's going away. We see ourselves as an evolving business that will continue to provide energy into the future, and we're really excited about doing that.
Thanks, Debbie. So let's go to the questions from the audience, if we can, for a few minutes. Here's the first one. It's how can we as a community deepen our understanding of energy policies and actively address these issues? As a college student in Colorado, I'm eager to learn more about how these policies impact my community and explore practical ways to contribute to sustainable solutions. Who would like to grab that one? Bobby, do you feel comfortable?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't come into the electric power industry knowing all, and so I did policy on Capitol Hill, but I really had to take time and learn this industry a bit more, and I'm still learning. And so there are obviously outlets for you to read. I think Utility Dive and Electric Perspectives are great trade press magazines that you can sort of glean a lot of news from. Punchbowl is another great news source around some of the sectors that they sort of hone in on our specific issues. And so particularly if you're in college, I think that, reading and learning a little bit more about like what some of these agencies are doing with respect to the industry just can give you some more context about how the actors of this industry are moving.
Thanks, Kwame. Germain, would you like to tackle that one as well?
Yes, thank you. First thing that comes to mind is like get involved. I mean, get curious. I'm thankful that the general public has an interest in energy. When we started investing in energy, nobody would talk about it. It was kind of like the thing in the background that now it's important, it's relevant, but also regardless of the conversation, if it's clean or not, energy it's part of the conversation. I'm thankful and grateful for that. To Paola, my suggestion, besides what Kwame mentioned, is start local. I mean, the utilities have a lot of information and they share. Go in your state in Colorado, especially, there's a lot about geothermal. There's a lot of information about geothermal, which is fantastic to learn. And I think that regulation is such an ever-changing thing that I would first focus on the energy and understand the impact that has in our day-to-day lives and the quality of life, and then move on to regulation. That's my 2 cents.
And I would add here, you're doing it right now by participating in this. discussion. So we really appreciate your tuning in. And I think that groups like CHLI and others that are involved in the industry or in just general policy making, there are a lot of them in DC. So any good internet search will find you a lot of types of things, but make it a broad reach. And I do this often. I'll listen in to either an environmental group's call or something, because I want to understand their perspective and where they're coming from and what they're saying about things, because it helps me be better at my job as well. So kudos for getting on to this and sticking it out with us. It's a long discussion, but I think it's really important. And CHLI does a lot of good work in that space. The other thing I would encourage you is to think about an internship that is not in the actual job zone that you think you're going to work in, because you're in a zone right now where you can learn anything you want. And what you may find is you'll be bit by the bug and decide to go into that line of work too. So I think that internships and companies like mine and, companies all over Colorado have opportunities that are really interesting and cool. And you don't always have to make your internship about the job you think you want to have right then. I will admit here that I am a theater major and never thought I would end up working in politics, and certainly not for an oil and gas company, but it's turned out really well. And it's because I was willing to take a chance and do something a little bit different than what people told me that I had to do right then. And it turned into a really interesting career. So thank you again for tuning into this. We really appreciate it.
Great comments, Debbie. Well, great comments by all our panelists. And I think one of the key points that was made early on in the answer to this question is stay curious. And then I think the other key point is to not box yourself in terms of the sources of information that you turn to. Try to be open the aperture up in terms of the places where you grab your information so that you can get a balanced view moving forward. We have another question here that this one may be a little tougher. It says, how can the U.S. manage competition and new sanctions from China in the context of critical minerals? What are the factors to this issue, and how pressing are they? Who would like to take the first stab at this?
Well, I'm a little passionate about this because Chevron does business in two countries that could be a substitute for China, and that's Argentina and Kazakhstan. They both have really great deposits of critical minerals, and I think that we should really look to them to see if we can help them grow and develop. And I know that those governments are looking at their resources as well, but we also are not developing all the ones that we have here. And I think that we need to look at our mining policy. The Congressman Pete Stopper from Minnesota has been very active on this issue and is trying to get people to understand that mining does not have to be a bad thing, that this is a really good resource for us, and that we do have some resources that we're not developing, and that we should look at that to find balance. I'm not one that would say that you can completely cut off a big country like China. We do need to try to balance that, but we've basically played into their hands by not developing these other relationships and these other resources. So I think we need to be really creative about how we look at that. And then, the idea of friendshoring is really important in everything that we do. And we need to look at people who are our allies and say, yes, let's work together to see if we can develop these resources. So I would encourage you all to get to know more about Argentina and Kazakhstan. They're both fascinating places, and they're places that have just incredible resources that we could access.
Thank you, Debbie. Germaine or Kwame, would y'all like to tackle that one as well?
Well, I just have to second exactly what Debbie says, because my first thing that came to mind was Argentina. I mean, that was the first. So it's exactly, she's spot on.
Thank you, Kwame. Any additions?
I'll concur with my colleagues on that one.
All right. Quick answers on both of those. That's great. How about here's another question. It says, this is probably more for Kwame. So Kwame, I'm going to get you to give me a quick one on this one. It says, how will Congress and the new administration deal with the need to enhance the grid and interconnections other than trying to expedite permitting? You feel comfortable that one?
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of folks that there's been a problem, particularly in PJM, the market that we're in the DMV and parts of Pennsylvania, with the queue and folks trying to get onto the grid. There's a backlog in that regard. I think a lot of that is going to be determined by what happens at FERC in particular with the makeup of the commission going forward, and then some of the critical questions that the commission will have to answer. Does the administration want to center more power at FERC to make way for more permitting authority, or do they want to continue to have the state commissions have more of a role to play in that regard? And so I do think there'll be some questions to answer next year once the makeup of the commission becomes set and we know who the new chair will be.
Okay, great, Kwame. Thanks. We're going to have one more question, and then we're going to give each of the panelists a chance to share their closing thoughts with the audience. So be thinking about those. Here's the last question. It says, AI is going to drive much of the U.S.'s energy future consumption by way of data centers and et cetera. Plus the demand through electric cars in the U.S. is on its way to generate. So let me rephrase that. AI is going to drive much of the U.S.'s future energy consumption by the way of the data centers and et cetera, plus additional demand through electric vehicles. The question is the U.S. on its way to generate enough energy to meet this demand at the rate at which it is rising? If not, what comes to mind to accelerate our ability to reach that extra demand on time?
I have some ideas on that. I don't know if I don't want to speak out of turn of my membership. However, we do need to build more capacity in areas in which that capacity is warranted. We have, again, states and companies that have deregulated markets. And we have to sort of figure out a way to sort of make the price points work where the demand is high. It's a little bit easier for our companies who are vertically integrated to sort of build out and earn on new generation versus our members who cannot. And so how do we find balance in that regard? I do think it's a tremendous opportunity, though. I got into this business 10 years ago, and demand was sort of flat. And within the past 2 or 3 years, it has spiked, and all because of data centers and AI. And so how do we continue to meet the demand of new load growth while maintaining reliability? And that's going to be a big question for us moving forward. I'm of the opinion, just taking my EEI hat off, is that we have to build our way out of it. And how we do that is going to be the question.
Oh, thanks, Kwame. Germaine, any thoughts on that area?
Yes. I'm not worried about capacity or generation. I know that we will be able to generate. I will focus. My concern is on the grid stability, the capacity to do that. I mean, of course, I believe that distributed generation might play a role. But nowadays, I mean, a medium-sized data center, we're looking at, 500 megawatts. I mean, there are so many combined cycles assets laying around that you can get them. It's a matter of resources. I don't want to use the word permitting again because, you're going to kick me out of this chat. But generation is not my concern. My concern is grid stability. I will be very happy to see SMRs coming online, especially because they have a very low supply chain footprint. So there's not going to be a lot of dependence from foreign materials. But the grid and the grid stability, it would be my focus to answer the ever-growing need of energy from the AI and data centers.
Thank you. Debbie, any comments there?
Well, I just think this discussion is interesting how it's evolving because, you think 30 years ago, people weren't talking about creating their own power source by their facility. And now that's becoming more of a standard. We used to be an outlier doing some of that work. And so we're kind of a mix of the grid and doing our own. So the one thing I will say, and especially because I know we've got college students watching this, I think there is some smart kid who has the solution in his brain and he's about to create it on the computer that's going to come up with some new idea that's going to help deal with this in the future because the demand is there and we're all talking about it. So I think it's just great that young minds are thinking about ways to address these problems in a new sustainable way. Maybe there's some new thing that's going to help us scale up our energy or handle our distribution and the way we do it differently. So I'm excited about the future in energy. And I think we get so wrapped up in the problems sometimes we don't think about how cool it is that we are in this time with all of these new ideas coming on board that are going to allow us to have a different future.
Okay, I lost. Okay, I'm good. Okay, thank you. My Zoom was misfiring for a minute, so I apologize for that. Debbie, why don't we roll into closing comments? Why don't you give us a minute of your closing thoughts, and then Kwame and Germaine will go with you, and then we're going to turn it over to Marianne.
Well, in my closing comments, I want to talk a little bit about CHLI and what they bring to the table. I think it's really important for organizations like this to look at segments of the population and say, how can we help develop leaders of the future? And I've met a lot of these young people who've come in to do internships and fellowships, and they are amazing. So I encourage the people who are watching to support programs like this. And if you're younger, to get involved in programs like this, to give yourselves the opportunity to learn in a space that's created by an institution like this. We think it's really important, and we see this as our future workforce. We believe that Chevron is a great place to work. I can tell you personally, I think it's a wonderful place to work. And we have a lot of jobs that you wouldn't necessarily think of. You know, happen to be in the government affairs space, but we have chemists, we have people working on sustainable energy, we have people looking at how to use water better, we have business managers, et cetera. So as you look at a company, there's a narrative that some people want you to believe, but when you look at a whole company, look at all of the things that we all do, and look at the potential for you growing within that company and having an opportunity to do something else in the future. And I'm really pleased to be part of CHLI and working with young people in that space. And I'm hoping that some of them will end up working for us in the future. And I know that they are leaders of the future who will help attack some of these public policy issues and do so in a really productive, comprehensive way. So thank you very much for tuning in and letting us talk to you during this time.
Well, thank you, Debbie, and I appreciate you talking about the importance of Chile to help raise the next generation of bright policymakers that have good understandings of the basic components of our economy, and particularly things like energy. Kwame, any closing comments from our discussion today, or what to look forward to moving and looking down the road?
Well, first of all, again, I want to piggyback on my colleagues' comments about the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. It's been a valued resource for me since I've joined. I look forward to engaging with some of the young people that come through this program. I think it's very important to support non-for-profit organizations like this that allow for kids who grew up like I did, who were not aware of all of these apparatuses and resources in Washington, to give opportunities to kids to come here and be leaders and public policy professionals, and hopefully elected leaders one day themselves, right? That said, going forward, I think that the energy landscape will continue to grow and expand, just given all of the new market technologies. I think we'll have to watch the Hill a bit just to see, whether or not folks are able to sort of move forward in unison, given the new majorities and the math, and also just politics is local, and in this town, politics is 24/7, and so while we just came out of a presidential election, I've already started getting emails about the midterms in 2026, and so. I think the political landscape will continue to be a little bit rocky, but as always, we'll navigate our way through it on behalf of our customers.
Germaine, you've got 30 seconds to bat cleanup here.
Okay, very quick. It's an amazing time to be alive. It's an amazing time to be here, to witness the changes, to be part of the changes that definitely improves our way of life. Innovation is playing a key role in that. And when it comes to energy policy, well, I'm very happy that actually it's the conversations on the table. I mean, the energy and the energy policy, it's one of the main key issues. So my message to everybody who's listening is get involved, be curious, be part of that, explore, try, make mistakes, but then you're gonna figure out, like you, Debbie, said, you're gonna figure out what you're gonna do. But the possibilities are endless, and it's a fantastic time to be alive. That's all I have to say.
Jermaine, thank you. I'd like for all of our audience to give a nice virtual round of applause to our panelists today. So, Debbie, Kwame, and Jermaine, thank you so much for everything that you did to help us out. I'm now going to turn the floor over for closing remarks and wrap up to our illustrious President and CEO of CHLI, Marianne Gomez-Horta.
Well, thank you again to all of you, and to everyone who's watching and spent some time with us today. This rich conversation is part of what we do on a regular basis. The diversity of thought, perspectives, backgrounds. We tell our interns when they show up, right, that your experiences, your life experiences, the experiences of your family matter. They matter every day. And when you're in Washington, you're going to get to add even more perspectives, and take the time to learn from a different perspective. It's amazing how many times we get, this tunnel vision, basically because how we grew up, and we don't take the time to learn from somebody else. So thank you all for the wisdom. A shout out again to our board members, the Honorable Bill Flores, Debbie Marshall, and our awesome advisory council members as well, Herman and Kwame. Thank you again for the time and for the input. Want to encourage everyone, as Gabriel mentioned in the beginning, this conversation was recorded, and so we will make that available on our YouTube channel. For those of you that did not comment or did not have a question, take the time, definitely after this, to provide your input, your insights, anything else, a resource that you think we should consider. We would greatly appreciate that as well. And because we're not in person, if we were in person, I would ask all of us to kind of get together for a group photo and ask the photographer to, line us all up. So I'm going to ask that we all look at the camera, we smile, and the team is going to take some of those awesome virtual screenshots so that we can document this awesome group. So again, on a 1, 2, 3, please smile and look at the camera, and we'll end with some awesome selfies and screenshots. So 1, 2, and 3. Thank you. God bless. Happy holidays to everyone. Thank you. Muchísimas gracias. Adiós.